Commander Vextel stood at the bridge of his command ship, his scaled hide gleaming under the harsh military lighting, as he watched Haven Colony through the tactical display. The agricultural world looked like any other primitive settlement his forces had conquered, patches of cultivated land stretching across the continental mass, simple structures dotting the landscape, and only basic orbital defenses. Another bloodless victory for the Archives, he announced to his bridge crew, mandibles clicking in anticipated triumph. Begin the standard conquest protocol. The Zarkak strike force descended through the atmosphere in perfect formation, their dropships moving with the choreographed precision that had overwhelmed 273 previous civilizations. The colony's main settlement lay before them, its inhabitants scurrying for cover like the primitive creatures they were. That's when everything went wrong. The first sign that this wasn't a standard conquest came when the colony's irrigation systems suddenly burst, spraying what appeared to be water into the air. Vextel's sensors registered an odd mineral content, but dismissed it as irrelevant. 3 seconds later, a series of electromagnetic pulses turned the water-saturated air into a conducted web of energy, shorting out the primary systems of 24 dropships. Impossible, Vextel hissed, his inner eyelids flickering in disbelief. Their technology level doesn't support such tactics. The command channel crackled to life, carrying a voice that would haunt his dreams for years to come. Welcome to Haven, you scaly bastards. I'm Colonial Defense Chief Jessica Martinez, and you just crashed my daughter's soccer game. The voice had a strange quality that Vextel would later learn was called amusement. It made his scales itch. Across the battlefield, the seemingly primitive agricultural equipment began to move. Harvest combines transformed into mobile cover, their heavy-duty frames surprisingly resistant to standard plasma fire. Fertilizer silos detonated in precisely calculated sequences, creating killing zones in the approaching ground forces. Second wave, engage their leaders, Vextel ordered, following the battle doctrine that had served the Imperium for millennia. Decapitate their command structure. The response came back seconds later. Sir, we can't identify their leadership. They're all fighting. Even the food preparers are coordinating attacks. Martinez's voice cut through the chaos again. You're looking for a chain of command. Sorry, sugar. On Haven, everyone's a fighter. Just ask Tommy here. He makes the best apple pie in the colony, and he just turned your left flank into scrap metal with a modified thresher. Vextel watched in horror as his forces' perfectly orchestrated attack dissolved into chaos. The humans were using combat patterns he'd never seen, adapting their tactics the moment his forces found a counter. A group of juvenile humans, children, he would later learn, had somehow reprogrammed agricultural drones to swarm his artillery positions. Status report, he demanded. Sir, we've lost 60% of our ground forces. The humans, they're not fighting like primitives. They're using our own formation against us, but they're also using techniques we've never seen. They're improvising. Sir, the final blow came when his command ship detected a massive energy buildup below. The humans had somehow converted the colony's entire power grid into an electromagnetic pulse generator. The last thing Vextel heard before his systems crashed was Martinez's voice, as casual as if she were discussing the weather. Next time you want to invade someone, try the colony over on New Mars. I hear they're actually civilized. Us, we're just simple farmers. As his ship's emergency systems engaged and his fleet retreated in disarray, Vextel made 2 entries in his personal log. First, humans are not the primitives their technology level suggests. Second, never, ever interrupt their young's sporting events. The defeated Haven would change the galaxy's understanding of human combat capabilities forever. But for Commander Vextel, it was just the beginning of an obsession that would transform both him and the Imperium's approach to warfare. As his ship limped away from the colony, The final transmission from Haven's surface was a simple text message. And we're just the farmers. Imagine what our actual military is like. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as Admiral James Hangman Cooper strode to the central platform. His dress whites gleamed under the crystalline lighting, medals and ribbons telling a story of combat that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Distinguished representatives, he began, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of command. You've called this session to discuss the human problem. Specifically, how a simple farming colony defeated one of the most advanced military forces in known space. He paused, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. I'm here to show you something far more terrifying. A holographic display activated, showing a scene that made several council members lean forward in confusion. Children, no more than 10 Earth years old, were running around a grassy field. What you're watching, Cooper continued, is a traditional human game called Capture the Flag. Pay close attention to the red team's strategy. The alien delegates watched as the children organized themselves without obvious communication. One group created a diversion, while another used natural cover to flank their opponents. The blue team's flag was captured in a textbook military maneuver. By age 10, human children have internalized basic combat tactics through play, Cooper explained. This particular game teaches resource management, territory control, and the principle of force multiplication. A Rylaxian representative's voice wavered as she spoke. These are young, and you train them for war already. Cooper's laugh made several delegates flinch. Train them? No, distinguished representative. They came up with this on their own. Humans don't need to be taught warfare. We naturally turn everything into combat practice. The display shifted to show a different scene, a professional sports event. This is what we call American football. Notice the battlefield analysis, the strategic deployment of forces, the use of feints and counter-feints. Every human who watches this is subconsciously studying advanced military tactics. The Zarkak's representative, still smarting from the Haven defeat, rose to object. This is propaganda. No species naturally. Cooper cut him off by switching the display to security footage from Haven Colony. It showed a group of farmers converting their equipment into defensive positions with practiced ease. This was taken 3 minutes after your forces were detected, Cooper said quietly. No orders were given. No central command activated. These civilians independently organized and created a battle strategy that defeated your elite forces. Do you know why? He switched the display again, this time showing children playing in a sandbox. Because every human child does this. We build fortifications for fun. We devise strategies as entertainment. We turn every activity, every sport, every game into a lesson in warfare. The council chamber erupted in murmurs as Cooper continued his presentation. He showed them human dance competitions where participants demonstrated perfect spatial awareness and coordination. He displayed video games where players managed resources and commanded vast armies. He even brought up footage of human business meetings where terms like strategy, campaign, and target market peppered the conversation. The true terror of humanity isn't our technology or our strength, Cooper concluded, his voice echoing through the silent chamber. It's that we never stop preparing for war, even when we're at peace. Every human activity, from our children's games to our adult entertainment, hones our combat capabilities. He let that sink in before delivering his final point. The farmers at Haven weren't trained warriors. They were just typical humans who, like all of us, had spent their entire lives subconsciously preparing for battle. And if that's what our farmers can do. The Admiral let the thought hang in the air, but every delegate finished it silently. What could humanity's actual military do? As the session ended, Cooper overheard a Xarian ambassador whispering to his aide. They don't even realize they're doing it. Their entire species is a military training program, disguised as a civilization. Hooper smiled. They were finally beginning to understand. Major Emily Ghost Sullivan had transformed the austere Galactic archives into something the alien researchers had never seen before. A combat evolution laboratory. Holographic recreations of ancient battles flickered around the chamber, while real weapons from different eras lined the walls. "You want to understand human warfare?" she asked the group of wide-eyed xenohistorians. "Then stop staring at data screens and pick up a weapon." A tentative correction researcher lifted a Roman gladius, its metal gleaming under the archive's lights. "This is primitive," he noted, 4 eyes blinking in sequence. Sullivan grinned. "Is it?" With a quick motion, she drew an ultra-modern combat knife from her belt. "Notice anything familiar?" The gathered researchers gasped as she held the 2 blades side by side. The basic design was nearly identical, despite the centuries between them. "Humans don't just remember our combat history," Sullivan explained, expertly twirling both weapons. "We build upon it." That Roman sword's design influenced blades for 2,000 years. We're still using its principles in zero-G combat knives today. She moved to a holographic display showing ancient Greek phalanx formations. With a few quick commands, the image shifted to a modern space fleet deployment. "See the pattern? Same strategic principle, different scale. We took Bronze Age combat formations and adapted them for interstellar warfare." A Moroccan scientist raised a tentacle. "But surely such ancient methods." Sullivan interrupted by throwing a spear through a hologram of a spacecraft's shield configuration. The alien researchers jumped as the spear's path perfectly traced the shield's weakness. "That throw," she said, "learned it from studying Aboriginal hunting techniques. Our modern missile guidance systems use the same trajectory calculations those ancient hunters worked out by instinct. We don't discard old knowledge, we transform it." Moving through the exhibition, Sullivan demonstrated how medieval siege warfare principles were applied to modern planetary defense systems. She showed them how Native American guerrilla tactics had been adapted for asteroid belt combat. Each example built upon the last, creating a tapestry of continuous military evolution. "Here's what really terrifies other species," Sullivan said, activating a time-lapse hologram of human warfare development. "Most civilizations perfect a single style of combat and stick to it. Humans, we never stop innovating." The display showed the progression: sticks and stones becoming spears, spears becoming bows, gunpowder weapons, nuclear arms, energy weapons, and technologies the researchers didn't even recognize. "Every time we hit a limit, we don't stop. We change the game entirely," Sullivan continued, walking through the hologram. "Can't pierce their armor. We invent gunpowder. Shields too strong. We create antimatter weapons. There's no final form of human combat, because we never stop evolving." She paused at a display of modern human combat suits. "And here's the most important lesson. We don't just learn from victory. Every defeat, every stalemate, every near miss becomes part of our combat evolution." The Major picked up an ancient stone axe, its edge still sharp after millennia. "This tool helped us survive against creatures 10 times our size. We were never the strongest, fastest, or most durable species on our world. But we were the ones who kept learning, kept adapting, kept improving." As the session concluded, Sullivan left the researchers with one final demonstration. She asked each of them to try breaking a small branch. None could. Then she showed them how to use leverage and technique to break a much larger branch with minimal effort. "That's human combat evolution in a nutshell," she said, watching understanding dawn in their alien eyes. "We don't just get stronger, we get smarter. And we never, ever stop learning." As the researchers filed out, one lingered to study the timeline display. "Major," he asked, "what's the next evolution?" Sullivan's smile carried all the predatory heritage of her species. Why don't you stick around and find out? Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Quicksilver Reynolds lounged in the sterile observation chamber of the Xenological Research Facility, his relaxed posture contrasting sharply with the rigid attention of the alien scientists studying him. The lead researcher, Dr. Zixtal, adjusted her sensory apparatus with growing frustration. "Colonel, we're attempting to measure your combat response patterns," she clicked, mandibles twitching. "Please take this seriously." Reynolds grinned, spinning a stylus between his fingers. "Oh, but I am. In fact, I've already started the demonstration." He nodded toward the cafeteria visible through the observation window. "Tell me, what do you see out there?" The researchers turned to watch the facility's lunch service in progress. "Standard nutritional distribution," one noted. "Nothing of military significance." "Really?" Reynolds stood, still spinning the stylus. "In the last 10 minutes, I've identified 3 former military personnel among the kitchen staff, established a mutual recognition code using nothing but coffee cup placement, and created an emergency response network throughout the cafeteria." The aliens stared at him in disbelief. Reynolds pointed to an elderly human woman serving soup. "Margaret there. 20 years special forces before she became a cook. The way she's positioned gives her clear lines of sight to all major exits." He tapped the window, indicating a young man cleaning tables. Jake's never served formally, but he was a competition marksman. He's automatically keeping count of everyone who enters and leaves, a habit from his tournament days. "Impossible," Dr. Zixtal protested. "You've had no communication with them." Reynolds' smile widened. "Humans don't need direct communication to form combat networks. We do it instinctively. Watch this." He pressed the facility's intercom button and played 3 musical notes. Instantly, the entire cafeteria staff shifted their positions. Tables were subtly repositioned, creating clear lanes through the room. Serving utensils were gripped in ways that transformed them from innocent tools to potential weapons. "That's disturbing," one researcher muttered. "That's human combat psychology," Reynolds corrected. "We're never really out of the fight. Every human carries a warrior's mind, whether they've served or not. It's not about training. It's about instinct." To further demonstrate, he called in a group of random facility workers, janitors, technicians, and office staff. Without explanation, he knocked over a glass of water. Before any of the researchers could react, the humans had already organized themselves. One group contained the spill, another secured the area, and a third had already started implementing prevention measures. No orders were given. No chain of command was established. They just moved. "Notice how they naturally formed a command structure?" Reynolds asked. The person with the most relevant experience took lead. Others fell into support roles. "That's how we fight too." Dr. Zixtal's analysis equipment was working overtime. "But your stress indicators, you're all laughing. Even in a minor crisis, you're enjoying this." "Ah, now you're getting it," Reynolds said. "Humans use humor as a combat tool. It reduces stress, builds unit cohesion, and—" he paused, looking at his watch, "it makes us really unpredictable." At that exact moment, the cafeteria erupted into a massive food fight. But it wasn't chaos. It was coordinated. Teams had formed spontaneously, using tables as cover, creating supply lines for more ammunition, and setting up complex crossfire zones with mashed potatoes. "This," Reynolds explained to the stunned researchers, "is why human warriors are so dangerous. We turn everything into combat practice, even our play. Every human is a potential warrior because every human activity is, at its core, practice for war." As the food fight wound down, the participants were already efficiently organizing cleanup teams. No orders given, no central command, just humans being humans. But the most terrifying part, Reynolds added, "This isn't even our final form. We're still evolving, still adapting, and we're teaching others to do the same." Dr. Zixtal made one final note in her research log. "Perhaps the question isn't what makes human warriors the galaxy's deadliest force. It's whether the galaxy is ready for what they'll become." The sacred combat arena of the Zarkax gleamed under the light of 3 moons, its ancient walls etched with the names of champions past. High Admiral Kivek stood before the assembled dignitaries, his scales reflecting the ceremonial lights as he announced the trials. "We have brought this human to prove once, and for all the superiority of Zarkax combat doctrine," he declared, gesturing to Sergeant Grace Havok Thompson. "Each trial will test." Yeah. Thompson interrupted, rolling her shoulders as she stretched. "Let's skip the speech and get to the fun part." She was already bouncing on her toes, a movement pattern the aliens didn't recognize but would soon learn to fear. The first trial was set in zero gravity. Thompson's opponent, a decorated Zarkax Void Warrior, moved with practiced precision, using standardized combat patterns perfected over centuries. Thompson break-danced her way through space. Is she dancing?" one observer asked in confusion. Indeed she was. Every pop, lock, and spin translated perfectly into zero-G maneuvers. Thompson's background in street dance gave her an intuitive understanding of momentum and rotation that the rigid Zarkax training couldn't match. She finished the bout with a back spin that turned into a devastating kick, sending her opponent spinning into the safety nets. "That's what we call freestyle." She winked at the stunned crowd. The underwater trial was meant to exploit human respiratory weakness. Instead, Thompson used techniques from her weekend job as an underwater welder, combined with surfing experience, to turn the pool into her personal combat domain. She actually held her breath longer than her gilded opponent, having spent years training in similar conditions for fun. Plus, she added after emerging victorious, "I used to play Marco Polo as a kid. Great practice for fighting blind underwater." The endurance trial in toxic atmosphere revealed another surprise. While her opponent relied on breathing apparatus, Thompson had already adapted her boxing ring experience of controlled breathing under stress. She outblasted the Zarkax warrior through techniques learned in high school sports. "You should try running track in Houston summer heat," she quipped. "Now that's toxic air training." But it was the psychological combat trial that truly broke their understanding of human capabilities. In a chamber designed to induce fear and confusion, Thompson started laughing. "This is like that haunted house I worked at in college," she called out, actually enjoying herself. Though our jump scares were better. She proceeded to turn their psychological warfare against them, using horror movie quotes and eerie nursery rhymes to unnerve her opponent. The Zarkax warrior, trained to resist standard fear tactics, had no defense against "Ring Around the Rosie" sung in the dark. The final trial was meant to be impossible. Simultaneous combat against multiple styles of opponents. Thompson faced a Zarkax speed fighter, a Krith power warrior, and a Vextal technical specialist all at once. She turned it into a dance battle. "You see," she explained while effortlessly weaving between her opponents, "humans don't just learn one style and master it. We mix everything together." A capoeira dodge flowed into a judo throw, followed by a boxing combination. We take what works and make it our own. As her last opponent hit the ground, Thompson performed a perfect victory dance, much to the horror of the traditional Zarkax observers. High Admiral Kivex approached her after the trials. "You have defeated our best warriors by dancing, playing games, and laughing." Thompson shrugged. "Everything humans do is combat training, whether we know it or not. Those kids playing dance games at the arcade, they're learning combat mobility. Swimmers at the beach, underwater combat practice. Even our entertainment teaches us to fight." She gestured to the arena around them. Your problem is you think combat is something special, set apart from normal life. For humans, everything is combat practice. We just make it fun. The final entry in the trial records read, Human Combat Capability Assessment. Unable to quantify. They turn everything into training and everything into a game. There is no activity that is not, in some way, combat practice for them. Thompson's only comment on the official record, wait till they see what we can do when we're actually trying. Colonel Ryan Pixel Anderson stood before the Galactic Military Council's Gaming Investigation Committee. His usually sharp uniform intentionally rumpled, a wireless controller dangling from his hand. The assembled alien officers stared at the large screen behind him, where a virtual space battle raged. This, he announced, gesturing to the game, is what your average human teen does for fun on a Friday night. An Arthaxian general chittered in dismissal. We are aware of human entertainment simulations, Colonel. They are irrelevant, too. Irrelevant? Anderson interrupted, his fingers dancing across the controller. On screen, his virtual fleet executed a perfect pincer movement. This irrelevant entertainment just demonstrated the exact tactic that defeated your third fleet at Proxima Centauri. The room fell silent. The player who developed that strategy, Anderson continued, a 14-year-old girl from Nebraska. She posted it on something called Reddit because she thought it looked cool. Your fleet never stood a chance because they were fighting against the collective gaming experience of billions of humans. He switched the display to a popular battle royale game. Look familiar? This is how our drop troops learn urban combat navigation. While your soldiers run simulations dozens of times, our civilians play thousands of matches for fun. The committee watched as players built fortifications on the fly, managed resources, and coordinated complex attacks without verbal communication. Every hour, humans collectively spend 10,000 years in combat simulations, Anderson explained. We call it gaming. You call it the most sophisticated combat training program in the galaxy. He pulled up statistics on secondary displays. Last year, humans spent 8 billion hours playing this one game. That's more combat training hours than every other species' military combined. And this is just one game out of thousands. A Vexlor strategist raised an appendage. But these are just games. They don't translate to real combat. Anderson's smile was sharp. Computer, display the Meridian defense pattern. The screen split. One side showed a famous strategy game match. The other displayed footage from a recent space battle. The left is from a tournament 3 years ago. The right is from last month's defense of the Meridian colony. Notice anything? The patterns were identical. The commander of that defense had never served in space combat, Anderson revealed. But she had 10,000 hours in strategy games. When the attack came, she didn't need to think. She'd already fought that battle countless times in simulation. He switched to footage of children playing a virtual reality game. Their movements precise and coordinated. While your youth train in traditional combat forms, ours are learning to navigate complex 3D spaces, manage resources under pressure, and coordinate team actions across multiple battlefields, all while having fun. Anderson picked up a gaming magazine. This month's issue has 16 new strategy games. That's 16 new combat simulators, each offering unique scenarios and solutions. Your military might run 100 combat simulations a year. We run millions every hour. He loaded up a massive multiplayer online game. Right now, 5 million humans are fighting battles in this virtual world. They're learning resource management, team coordination, and battle tactics. They're developing new strategies, testing theories, and evolving combat doctrine. And they think they're just playing a game. The committee watched in stunned silence as Anderson demonstrated game after game, each one teaching different aspects of warfare. The most terrifying part, he added, shutting down the displays. These games are teaching our children to think in ways your soldiers never will. Every human with a gaming device is a combat strategist in training, and they're training constantly. As the session ended, Anderson left them with one final thought. You're not just fighting human soldiers. You're fighting against the combined combat evolution of every game ever played, every strategy ever attempted, every virtual battle ever won or lost. In your terms, humanity has been running the galaxy's largest military training program, and we thought it was all just for fun. Captain Alexandra Phoenix Winters was already moving before the first explosion rocked the Galactic assembly chamber. As debris rained down from the shattered dome, her mind calculated angles, assessed threats, and formulated plans with the same instinct other species use to breathe. "Everyone down," she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos with parade ground authority. "Xarian delegates, your crystalline forms make you vulnerable to shockwaves. Get behind the marble columns." The attack had been perfectly timed. The separatist forces had struck during the annual diplomatic summit, when security was stretched thin to accommodate dozens of species' contradictory protection protocols. They'd expected chaos. They'd expected panic. They hadn't expected a human security advisor. "Arthaxian Honor Guard," Winters called out, already moving through the smoke. "Your natural armor makes you perfect for evacuation support. Form up on me." She'd memorized the biological capabilities of every species in the assembly during her light reading sessions. The insectoid warriors responded instantly to her tone of command, their programmed battle protocols overridden by something more primal, the recognition of natural leadership. "Mistwalkers of Europa," she continued, spotting the ethereal delegates trying to reach higher ground. "Your vapor form can scout the upper levels. We need eyes on those breach points." In less than 30 seconds, she transformed a room full of panicked diplomats into an organized response force. Species that had been historical enemies found themselves working together, their natural abilities complementing each other under her guidance. The first wave of separatist troops breached the chamber expecting to find scattered, helpless targets. Instead, they met a coordinated defense that utilized the unique strengths of 15 different species. "Vexlor delegates," Winters shouted, ducking under plasma fire. "Your photosynthetic abilities can turn these emergency lights into advantages. Concentrate the beams on Sector 3. She created a battlefield orchestra, each species playing its part in a symphony of survival. The crystalline Xarians refracted energy weapons. The vapor-form Europeans provided real-time intelligence. The Arthaxians formed living shields for the more vulnerable species. When a second explosion threatened to collapse the chamber's eastern wall, Winters was already there, organizing the gaseous halections into a pressure cushion. Just like a zero-G rugby scrum, she encouraged them, translating complex physics into terms they could instantly grasp. "How?" a wounded separatist commander asked after his capture. "How did you know all their capabilities?" Winters smiled as she secured his restraints. "I played a lot of party games at the diplomatic mixers. You'd be amazed what you learned during charades." The battle turned when the separatists deployed their secret weapon, a psychic dampener designed to disrupt the telepathic species in the assembly. But Winters had spent her academy years working as a nightclub bouncer. Crowd control was second nature. "Telepaths behind the empaths," she ordered. "Emotional species form a buffer zone. Just like managing a rowdy concert, we're creating psychic mosh pit rules here." As reinforcements finally arrived, they found the assembly chamber transformed. Species that had never cooperated were working in perfect harmony. Ancient rivals had found common purpose, and at the center of it all, a single human officer was running the show like a well-choreographed dance. "The deadliest thing about humans," the Arthaxian Prime later reported, "isn't their ability to fight. It's their ability to make others fight better." In 15 minutes, That human taught us more about our own combat potential than we'd learned in 1,000 years. The official after-action report noted that Captain Winters had coordinated the defense using references to games, sports, and social activities. She'd turned a diplomatic catastrophe into a masterclass in human leadership. In the end, the Separatists had failed not because they were outfought, but because they'd never understood the most dangerous human weapon of all: the ability to turn any group into a family, any crowd into an army, any crisis into a chance to rise above. Commander Vextel stood at the graduation podium of the first Multi-Species Combat Academy, his scales now bearing the distinguished markings of its student body president. 5 years had passed since his defeat at Haven Colony, and everything had changed. Master Sergeant Jack Shepard Davidson moved among the gathered graduates, his weather-worn face breaking into a proud smile as he adjusted a young Zarkax cadet's stance with a gentle touch. The same hands that could field strip a plasma rifle in seconds now spent most of their time helping others perfect their forms. Remember, Davidson called out to the assembly of 15 different species. Today isn't about becoming the deadliest warriors in the galaxy. It's about becoming the best teachers. The Academy's training grounds stretched out below the ceremony platform, each area telling its own story of evolution. In the Zero-G chamber, a human dance instructor was teaching crystalline Xarians how to use their natural geometry for complex spatial maneuvers. The underwater combat zone hosted a mixed class of aquatic and land species, all learning from a former Olympic swimmer. When I first met humans in combat, Vextel addressed the crowd. I thought I was fighting warriors. I didn't realize I was meeting teachers. The evidence of this truth was everywhere. A human chess champion was working with Arthaxian strategists, translating the game's principles into three-dimensional battle tactics. A street artist was teaching gaseous Halexians how to use urban architecture to their advantage. Even the cafeteria had become a lesson in resource management and logistics. Humans didn't conquer the galaxy, Davidson added, moving to the podium. We did something far more powerful. We taught the galaxy how to evolve. The graduation demonstration began, and the results were unlike anything the gathered dignitaries had ever seen. Crystalline species moved with fluid grace, their natural rigidity transformed into an asset through human dance principles. Hive mind species demonstrated individual initiative while maintaining their collective strength. Even the traditionally rigid Zarkax showed new forms that blended their ancient combat arts with human adaptability. Look at them, Vextel whispered to Davidson. Every species moving in ways their ancestors would have thought impossible. Davidson nodded. That's because we never taught them to fight like humans. We taught them to fight like the best versions of themselves. The demonstration reached its peak as teams of mixed species performed combat drills that looked more like elaborate dances. Each species' natural abilities complemented the others, creating something entirely new. Traditional enemies now moved in perfect synchronization, their ancient hostilities transformed into mutual respect through shared growth. The greatest weapon humans brought to the galaxy, Vextel announced to the crowd, wasn't their strength, their adaptability, or even their creativity. It was their understanding that true power comes from making others stronger. As if to demonstrate this point, the ceremony concluded with an unprecedented display, each graduate teaching their own unique interpretation of what they'd learned. New combat forms were born on the spot, the evolution of warfare happening in real time. Today, Davidson's voice carried across the field. You graduate not just as warriors, but as teachers. Your mission isn't to be the deadliest force in the galaxy. It's to help others find their own deadliness. The ceremony ended with a new tradition. Each graduate paired with a student from a different species, continuing the cycle of teaching and learning that had transformed galactic warfare. Vextel, once humanity's opponent, and now their most dedicated student, raised his voice in the final declaration. We came here to learn how to fight like humans. We learned something far more valuable: how to teach like humans. As the sun set on the academy grounds, Davidson watched the mingling species with satisfaction. You know what makes human warriors the galaxy's deadliest force? He asked no one in particular. We never stop learning, we never stop teaching, and we never, ever stop evolving. The galaxy had finally understood. The deadliest force wasn't the one that could destroy the most, but the one that could create the most growth. And in that art, humans would always be the galaxy's greatest masters.